Hello everyone and welcome back to our revision channel. This week's focus will be on the character of Gerald Croft in An Inspector Calls. Before we begin, please make sure you have your flashcards or your revision sheet handy and a pen so that you can make notes as we watch this video. So let's get straight into it. In order to understand An Inspector Calls, we need to understand life in Edwardian Britain. Today, An Inspector Calls is celebrated for Priestley's criticism of capitalism and middle-class hypocrisy. Critics view it as an accurate reproduction of pre-World War I society before it fell apart. Set in 1912, An Inspector Calls represents the continuation of Victorian morals and traditions. This was a time largely categorised by social hierarchies and gender norms. There was a huge distinction between the upper and lower classes in almost every single way. The idea was that the upper classes were superior to the lower classes, and the lower classes were expected to serve the upper classes. There were lots of stereotypes of lower class people being dirty and sinful. This fear of the poor began in the Victorian era, but continued well into the 20th century. The upper classes were convinced that the lower classes were all thieves and criminals and idle, and therefore did not deserve their help. Gerald Croft belongs to the upper classes. He is well bred, which indicates that he is from a good, affluent family. He is, as a result of this, expected to marry rich and continue his family line. So if we dig into the quotation that's on the screen, the well-bred young man about town, we see that it actually could have multiple connotations. The stage directions give us the impression that Gerald is a fashionable socialite who is attractive and confident in his own masculinity. He enjoys certain liberties and a lack of consequences as he roams about the town. This quotation, furthermore, could also foreshadow the unfaithful nature of Gerald's character, as he indulges in immoral behaviour by frequenting improper places such as the Palace Bar, as he searches for female companion. From the very beginning, we see that Gerald is superior even to the Berling family, and he is not afraid to abuse that privilege. We cannot talk about Gerald's character without discussing the patriarchy. The patriarchy is a system of society or government in which the father or eldest male is head of the family. Essentially, men are in control. If we look at these two spheres, we have the public and the private. The public sphere belonged largely to the men, who were able to enjoy many privileges without the pressure of acting like a family man. Men were able to engage in discussions of politics, economics, and much more that women were largely excluded from. It is in these public spaces, like the Palace Bar, that we see this man about town who is able to act immorally without facing any consequence. Whilst Gerald is quick to judge the immoral behaviour of Alderman Meggerty, who is a notorious womaniser, he fails to realise that he too is acting in the same way and abuses his power as a man with money and control. Women, however, were confined to the private sphere, or the home. It is in the home that Sheila is protected from unpleasant and disturbing things like her fiancé soliciting prostitutes. So let's look in more detail at Gerald's character. Here we have two quotations that show that Gerald is a traditional man and is superior to the Berlings. So considering the time in which this play is set, Gerald, like many men of the era, is traditional and upholds patriarchal values. He is depicted as the ideal husband and son-in-law due to his financial security and higher social status. So in the first quotation, when he gives Sheila the ring and she claims, "Is it the one you wanted me to have?" it appears that Gerald is caring and loving because he has chosen his fiancée's engagement ring. However, we could also argue that here he's acting as if he's not too bothered about this whole scenario. Perhaps he believes that this is something he has to do, almost like a chore. He does not even place the ring on Sheila's finger, and he simply gives it to her and doesn't share in her excited sentiments. Moreover, Berling's comments towards Gerald about him being the son-in-law he always wanted further imply that the marriage is a tactical one for the Burlings to gain notoriety and respect by marrying their daughter to a superior man. Gerald here then is depicted as being an ideal suitor simply because of his breeding. The neutral image that Priestley tries to create at the beginning of his play begins to break down as the audience learn about his involvement with Daisy Renton through the inspector's interrogation. For a man of high social standing, his morals are extremely questionable. Priestley depicts this in Gerald's blunt statement, "I hate those hard-eyed, doe-faced women." In order to understand this quotation, we need to realise that Gerald must frequent the palace bar in order to recognise that the hard-eyed and doe-faced women are ordinary features of that bar. That is why Daisy stands out to him. So let's break this quotation down even further. The verb hate is extremely harsh and reveals Gerald's misogynistic nature. The use of the noun those further adds to his misogyny, as he generalises and does not actually acknowledge these women as being individual beings. Additionally, Gerald continues to distance himself from the women at the palace bar. He does not see them as human beings, merely objects that are there for him to use. By using words such as hard-eyed and doe-faced, Priestley is highlighting the struggles that these women have had to endure throughout their lives. Gerald, however, does not see this, or refuses to see it, as he is ignorant to the needs of the poor. Instead, he lessens them to ugly creatures who are undeserving of his attention. When the inspector continues in his interrogation of Gerald, we see that reality is quite different to the performance of people. Gerald is deceptive and dishonest as he tries to control the narrative around his reputation. The first quotation, "So for God's sake don't say anything to the inspector," gives us a sense of desperation. Priestley is beginning to show Gerald's deception and reveal the hypocrisy of the upper classes. Gerald becomes somewhat aggressive with Sheila here as he implores her to keep quiet so that his reputation is not ruined. He clearly only cares more about himself than he does about his own fiancée. Further on in the interrogation, we see that Gerald notices Daisy in the palace bar as her appearance is striking and different to those of ordinary prostitutes. By using adjectives such as young and fresh, Priestley emphasises men's greed as they possess women based solely on their beauty. Gerald objectifies Daisy, viewing her almost as a piece of meat rather than an individual. Gerald is a predator who takes advantage of a young, vulnerable woman solely because he likes the look of her. The final quotation also suggests that Gerald has a hidden agenda when helping Daisy Renton. Perhaps he wanted a vulnerable woman that could not say no to him. He believes that Daisy was obsessed with him and he tries to justify his arrogance by claiming that he tried to help her. The fact that he is able to toss Daisy aside so easily solidifies the idea that he's only acting for himself as opposed to genuinely helping a destitute woman. So does Gerald Croft redeem himself at the end of the play? In my opinion, that is a very emphatic no. Priestley intentionally uses Gerald's character as a way to criticise the stubbornness of the upper classes. Whilst Gerald does appear to be upset about Daisy's death, he actually excuses himself to do some investigating. Does this really sound like someone who is truly devastated by the death of someone he loved? He is only interested in protecting his and the Burlings' reputation and is thrilled when he is able to call the inspector's visit a hoax. So the first quotation, "What girl? There were probably 4 or 5 different girls," gives us the impression that Gerald has no remorse for his involvement in Eva Smith's death. He continues using the generic noun girl and is in complete denial as he tries to distance himself from his improper behaviour. It is like he is justifying his actions by claiming that Eva is fictional. Furthermore, the second quotation, "Everything's all right now, Sheila," shows Gerald's delusion as he believes that he has done nothing wrong and can go back to normal immediately. He tries to be assertive by telling Sheila everything is fine, and again is trying to control the narrative to ensure that he faces no consequences for his behaviour. He believes that Sheila should be grateful for his private investigation and immediately forgive him, as if he has not betrayed her trust. Here are some useful adjectives you could use to describe Gerald Croft's character throughout the play. If you were to get a question on him in your literature exam, it is important to make sure you are tracking his character progression, even if he lacks one. Think about it chronologically and track him from the beginning, middle to the end. Please ensure you are analysing his character and analysing why Priestley has included him in his play. Priestley intentionally portrays Gerald as being a character who picks and chooses when to be moral. He is only able to do this when he benefits from it himself. Gerald is content to lie about his affair with Eva and is unrepentant until Sheila finds out. Similarly, he casts Eva aside when he is finished with her in order to further minimise the repercussions on him. Priestley uses Gerald to reveal the issue within society, as Gerald doesn't care about having done wrong until there are possible consequences that will affect him. So finally, to summarise Gerald, a character I absolutely loathe, we can say he is a character that shows little remorse for his actions, instead only caring about his own reputation and self-preservation. Priestley uses Gerald in a way to make us question the behaviour of the upper classes, as we see their hypocrisy and their manipulation of the truth, as Priestley allows Gerald to control his narrative. Priestley cleverly and blatantly attacks the upper classes of post-war Britain, depicting them as selfish and arrogant people who believe they are invincible and should never face repercussions for their behaviour. Whether you hate Gerald like me or see him as a good character, he represents the ignorance and selfishness of upper Edwardian society, who were unable to sympathise with the plight of the working classes. Thank you all for watching. Remember to bring in your flashcards or revision sheets. See you all next week.